Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be covering Breonna Taylor's murder because the 3 cops involved in her death still haven't been arrested for what they did. I'm going to ask you at the top of the video that if you like true crime content or commentary content to like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks. Breonna Taylor was born on June 5th, 1993 in Grand Rapids, Michigan to parents Tamika Palmer and Troy Herod. I apologize, I don't know how to say his name. I got some information from a public obituary that's available online. I wish I could go into more depth to sort of communicate the type of person Breonna was outside of this tragedy, but there's not much information I could find. Her mother, Tamika Palmer, has been fighting for justice ever since Breonna was killed. I'm unsure when Breonna or her family made the move from Michigan to Kentucky, but in 2011 she graduated from Western High School, and after that she went on to further her studies at the University of Kentucky. Breonna worked in healthcare and aspired to further her career. She started working in the healthcare sector in January 2016 for the city of Louisville, and they promoted her to EMT in June of 2016. She resigned from her position as an EMT for the city in November 2016 for unknown reasons. The city of Louisville says it's a personal matter, so they won't be making those documents public. After this, Breonna started working for U of L, which is the University of Louisville Health, as an emergency medical technician. From my understanding, an ER technician works under a nurse or a doctor in the ER and performs vital things vital tasks such as taking blood and then preparing patients and rooms before and after surgeries. Tamika said that Breonna one day wanted to become a nurse, buy a house, and start a family. Sadly, she was never able to achieve these goals because her life was cut short by police. Breonna Taylor and her apartment were identified by LMPD, which stands for the Louisville Metro Police Department. So they were identified as possibly being involved in a narcotics investigation they had going on. LMPD officers were investigating 2 men, Jamarcus Glover and Adrian Walker, on suspicions that they were trafficking drugs. Police had been conducting surveillance on a home since January 2020 in Louisville under the premise that they believed drugs were being bought and sold at this location. It is reported that Adrian Walker on January 2nd, 2020 stopped at this house, which this house is located on 2424 Elliott Avenue. So it's reported that Adrian stopped at this house for a short period of time before leaving. The police that were surveilling this house pulled Adrian over shortly after he left the house and searched his car, and they found some cash and a small amount of marijuana. Then on January 8th, 2020, 6 days later, Jamarcus Glover, who was driving the same car as Adrian Walker was in the time they searched previously, went to the house as well. At this time, Adrian Walker was in the passenger seat of the vehicle. When they arrive at the house, video surveillance catches Glover getting out of the vehicle and then dropping off a large blue cylinder-shaped object near rocks outside of the house. Police theorize that Glover and Walker are providing the house or the residents at the house with drugs when they run low, and then the pair drop off the drugs at a small pile of rocks near the property to sort of avoid detection. The house on Elliott Avenue was searched sometime between January to April 2020. I'm not 100% sure when, and they found cash, drugs, drug paraphernalia, scales, and several phones. LMPD Detective Joshua James filled out 5 affidavits for no-knock warrants on different locations that they were or they believed to be involved in the drug trafficking thing happening at 2424 Elliott Avenue, Walker, and Glover. One of these affidavits were for Breonna Taylor's apartment, and she was specifically identified as, I guess, a person of interest on the warrant. The warrant for Breonna Taylor's apartment sort of connected her to Jamarcus Glover, I'm not sure, sorry, and said that he made frequent trips to her apartment. apartment. It also stated that Glover was using Breonna's address to receive packages. LMPD alleged that Jamarcus once received a package at Breonna's apartment before heading or before driving to the drug house on Elliott Avenue. James wrote in the affidavit that he believed Jamarcus was receiving or stashing drugs or associated proceeds from the drug trafficking at Breonna's apartment. James wrote the affidavit for Breonna's apartment because LMPD wanted to search her apartment for drugs, money, weapons, paperwork, or electronic records that could link Breonna or her apartment to Jamarcus Glover and the drug trafficking. LMPD claimed that a U.S. Postal Security Service had verified that Jamarcus was receiving packages at Breonna's apartment. I found it reported that the way Breonna and Jamarcus were linked was that Breonna had briefly dated Jamarcus 2 years prior, and they sort of were acquaintances still. They talked from time to time, but it wasn't like they were close friends or anything. A Louisville postal inspector named Tony Gooden said that LMPD never came to himself or his office to verify Breonna's apartment and what packages she was receiving there. Gooden did say that another law enforcement agency, he doesn't identify who the law enforcement agency is, had come forward to him to ask his office to sort of check out if Breonna was receiving any suspicious packages. And then they did investigate Breonna and found that she was not receiving anything suspicious. So the claims that LMPD are making about a Postal Security Service verifying that she is getting packages for Jamarcus, I don't know where it's coming from. No other postal investigation service or office has come forward saying that LMPD asked them to check out Breonna. The 5 affidavits were reviewed on March 12, 2020 by Jefferson Circuit Judge Mary Shaw, who signed all 5 warrants within 12 minutes. All 5 warrants allowed LMPD to conduct no-knock searches. So what is a no-knock warrant? Essentially, a no-knock warrant allows police to forcibly enter a dwelling or a residence or a property to search it without knocking or ringing a doorbell or identifying themselves as police before entering. According to Wikipedia, most officers do identify themselves before entering houses during no-knock warrants, but who knows how accurate that is. No-knock warrants are theoretically supposed to be given in cases where they believe that identifying themselves or just alerting to the perps inside that the police are at their residence will be a risk to the investigation or the safety of the officers. They think that the people inside are either going to start destroying evidence or they're going to start shooting at police or harming them in some way. These warrants have always been highly controversial, and they are even more so after Breonna's death. LMPD has attempted to justify their use of a no-knock warrant by stating that, quote, "These drug traffickers have a history of attempting to destroy evidence, have cameras on the location that compromise detectives once an approach to the dwelling is made, and have a history of fleeing law enforcement." So, in my opinion, has LMPD labeled Breonna a dangerous drug trafficker with no real evidence. It needs to be noted that Breonna has no previous criminal record. She has no drug charges. There's really no reason why police should think that she would be trafficking. Around 12 hours after the warrants are signed by Mary Shaw, LMPD officers head out to Breonna's apartment. They arrived on March 13th, 2020, early in the morning, perhaps around 12:30 a.m. There is some controversy why LMPD decided to execute a warrant in the middle of the night when they were given the go-ahead 12 hours earlier, so they could literally have done it during the day or during the evening. evening. When police arrive at her apartment, both her and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who is staying with her at the time, are in bed. It is commonly reported that Breonna was actually sleeping when she was shot, but this is not true. When police arrived, yes, both Breonna and Kenneth were in bed, but they quickly got up when they heard the ruckus outside or at their front door. There's conflicting accounts on what happens next. So LMPD states that they identified themselves, that they knocked a few times and yelled out something to the effect of police, search warrant, or we have a search warrant or whatever, before forcibly entering Breonna's apartment with a battering ram. After an image was released by a Kentucky prosecutor called a Commonwealth attorney, it appears that LMPD officers did plan to knock and announce at Breonna's apartment before entering Breonna's apartment on Springfield Drive. Attorney Tom Wine, who's the one that released the images, would have been responsible for prosecuting Kenneth Walker after what took place in the shooting. But Kenneth and a few neighbors in the building assert that they never heard police identify themselves. Tom Wine tries to explain this away, saying that maybe they couldn't hear the cops through the door, but how thick does a door have to be that you can't hear someone yelling police? It's not a noise canceling door, so this doesn't make sense to me. Anyways, so Kenneth's perspective is Kenneth and Breonna hear knocking or something at the door. They hear banging at the door, so they get out of bed. Kenneth at this point thinks that there's some sort of intruders. It's literally after midnight. Who's coming to visit them? Obviously no one. And they're not expecting anyone. So Kenneth gets his gun from wherever it's placed in the room. Kenneth is a legal gun holder and he is allowed to keep the gun at Breonna's apartment. He has all the licenses and all the paperwork for that. Anyways, so they get out of bed and then they go into the hallway of Breonna's apartment, and Kenneth says that they repeatedly yell at the door, "Who is there? Who's this?" Trying to see if the person on the other side of the door identifies themselves. And then Kenneth says that they never identify themselves to be police. Which then again, Tom Wine's story of maybe they didn't hear doesn't make sense again, because he's literally listening to see if police are going to identify themselves on the other side of the door, and they don't. I'm pretty sure if police yelled, Kenneth and Breonna would have heard. So Kenneth says he doesn't hear a response from the other side of the door. So at this point, Kenneth and Breonna are scared to death, and they think that there is violent intruders trying to come into the apartment to either rob or harm them. So one of the officers that is present at the shooting, or was present at the shooting, was named Jonathan Mattingly, or is named Jonathan Mattingly, and he said that they spent a long time knocking, waiting for Breonna to come answer the door. Which then again, if someone's knocking at my door at 12:30 a.m., I would be very scared as well, because who is coming to your house that late at night if you're not expecting anyone? Allegedly, after knocking a few times, she didn't answer the door, so they started to verbally identify themselves, yelling things to the effect of, "Police, we have a search warrant," or "Open the door." Allegedly, she still doesn't reply or answer the door, so they used the battering ram to enter. But Mattingly's proposition of events doesn't really make sense to me, because why would Joshua apply for the no-knock warrant if they were gonna knock and announce themselves? Why would you even apply for that type of search warrant? If they did announce themselves and spend so long knocking, obviously they weren't worried that Breonna was violent or that she was going to destroy evidence, so why did they have to approach her house so late at night in such a sort of scary and explosive way? Why couldn't they wait till daylight to sort of approach Breonna and ask her questions and sort of execute the warrant then, when it was a more neutral setting, a more calming setting? Someone's not literally trying to, or you think they're trying to break into your house at 12:30 in the morning. So this doesn't add up to me. Also, Jamarcus Glover, at around the same time, a little bit earlier, other officers had executed a warrant on him, so they already had Jamarcus Glover located, so it's not like they thought he was in her apartment anyways, so why are they being so violent? So as I said, Breonna's neighbors report that they also didn't hear police identify themselves, but they did hear the commotion, the knocking, and the shots, which line up with Kenneth's perception of events. In fact, one of Breonna's neighbors, Chelsea Chelsea Napper is suing LMPD for total disregard of human life. Chelsea, who was pregnant at the time and also had a 5-year-old child in the house, said that a guy who was in her house was walking through the hallway and one of the stray bullets that police shot almost hit him in the head. And this is like someone who's not even in Breonna's apartment. This is a neighboring apartment, and a shot almost killed this guy. So back to Breonna's apartment. So 3 officers, Officer Brett Hankinson, Jonathan Mattingly, and Miles Crossgrove used the battering ram to forcibly enter her apartment. Reports state that there's at least 2 other officers outside of the apartment, including a lieutenant, but they haven't publicly named these individuals because they weren't involved. They didn't shoot and they didn't go into her apartment during the shooting. So Kenneth said that when police struck the door with the battering ram, it looked to him that the front door was exploding. So out of fear, Kenneth says he fires a warning shot at the intruders, the violent intruders that he thinks, to try to scare them off, to like let them know he has a gun. And he still can't see through the rubble and the dust at this point, so he's just shooting out the door. The shot struck Jonathan Mattingly in his thigh. As he goes down, Jonathan Mattingly starts like blindly shooting. I'm noting that Jonathan Mattingly is expected has made a full recovery from his injuries at this point. So at this point, all 3 officers, Brett Hankinson, Miles Crossgrove, and Jonathan Mattingly, start blindly returning fire. They fired more than 25 blind shots, like just showering essentially the apartment and neighboring apartments. There's pictures of bullets going through other apartments, and a patio glass door, I think, in the neighboring apartment was shattered because a bullet hit it. So at least 8 of these blind shots hit Breonna and she goes down. And to be a trained law enforcement and to blindly shoot off a bunch of gunshots when the person, I don't think Kenneth fired another shot after the warning shot, so it's just them blindly, randomly shooting into the apartment with no concern for neighbors or anyone's life. Like, they don't know if there's a kid in the building, they don't know who's in the building or the residents at the time. They're just shooting, which is crazy. Kenneth said that he thinks Breonna stayed alive for at least 5 minutes because she was sort of coughing up blood and struggling to breathe on the floor while Kenneth was beside her. Breonna didn't receive any medical attention for around 20 minutes after she was shot. So essentially, I think that police have to be CPR trained and trained like in first aid and stuff, obviously, if they're in emergency situations. All 3 officers didn't try to go forward and help Breonna in any way. They just sort of watched as she died in front of them and didn't really do anything, which is so disgusting to me, because the theory is that police are supposed to protect human life and serve communities, but they didn't try to help Breonna as she's dying on the ground. The coroner for the city states that they believe that she would have died within a minute or 2 and that there was no way they could have saved her. This doesn't justify them not trying, not at least going forward to try to help Breonna, in my opinion. Police then have the audacity to arrest Breonna's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, for attempted murder. Out of fear, he initially told police that it was actually Breonna who fired the gun, but it was just because he feared that he was going to be locked up and never get out of jail. He quickly corrects himself and says that, he legally owns the gun, etc., and that it was him who shot a warning shot because he thought it was intruders. The fact that they even arrested Kenneth is very absurd because of stand your ground laws that exist within Kentucky. Stand your ground laws essentially allow legal gun owners to protect themselves to shoot and kill intruders that come into their house. So Kenneth was well within his rights of the state to shoot at the intruders. Eventually, all charges against him were dropped by the prosecutor Tom Wine, and he was released from jail. Around 12:42 a.m., Kenneth and neighbors all fled calls to 911 dispatch. The neighbors report shots fired, whereas Kenneth calls and states that somebody has shot his girlfriend and she's dying on the floor right now. Kenneth said that he called his mom before he called 911, and he told his mom that someone had forcibly come into Breonna's apartment and Breonna was dying on the floor. His mom tells him to call 911, so he hangs up and he calls 911. On the phone with 911 dispatch, he says that someone shot Breonna. At this time, he still doesn't know that it's police that have shot them. Police still haven't identified. He literally has the time to call dispatch and report that there were shots fired because he thinks an intruder is still coming into his house. Police still haven't identified themselves to Kenneth as Breonna's dying on the floor.
I don't know what's happening. Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend.
Kenneth Walker is heard crying out Breonna Taylor's name.
Breathe. Oh
you said 26. Where was she shot at?
I don't know. She's on the ground right now. I don't know.
LMPD officers did not have body cams on them during the shooting. Almost 3 months after Breonna's death, Louisville City Council unanimously passed Breonna's Law. Breonna's Law bans no-knock warrants and requires all law enforcement to wear body cams and to turn their cameras on 5 minutes before executing a warrant, and to keep it on at least 5 minutes after completing the executed warrant. I think these are positive changes that needed to happen because there's obviously so many things wrong with no-knock warrants and police not wearing body cams, but Breonna still hasn't received full justice. Police in this case acted in a disgusting and dangerous way, and they need to be held accountable like civilians would for their actions. Brett Hankinson, Miles Cosgrove, and Jonathan Mattingly have not been criminally charged in Breonna's murder, even though they should be because their actions were erratic and dangerous. Trained police officers should not be blindly shooting into an apartment building, putting civilians and people in the residence at risk. Brett Hankinson was fired late June, literally over 3 months after Breonna was murdered, for blindly firing 10 shots into Breonna's apartment, which put herself and neighbors at risk. Breonna's family is pushing for Attorney General Daniel Cameron to file charges against all 3 officers, which I believe should happen. The attorneys for Breonna's family stated that, quote, by LMPD's own assessment in the Hankinson's termination letter, he committed wanton endangerment, wanton murder, and wanton attempted murder. So they are asking him to be criminally charged accordingly. Wanton murder or wanton endangerment essentially means that an individual engaged in extreme indifference to human life, which causes the death of an individual or harm of an individual. I believe all 3 officers' behavior constitute this charge. They should all be charged with these offenses. From what I could find, Jonathan Mattingly and Miles Cosgrove still haven't been fired from LMPD, which is a gross miscarriage of justice in my opinion to have officers like these still in the community, and it may just have a repetition of what happened with Breonna. It may happen again because they're still out there. They have proven themselves that they cannot handle the position. They can't handle being police, being authorities, because they don't know how to act. The FBI is currently conducting an independent investigation into the LMPD and the individuals and circumstances around Breonna's murder. Breonna had no criminal record, so LMPD had no real justification for associating her with drug trafficking. To associate her with an ex-boyfriend that she only briefly dated 2 years ago is such an absurd leap. They should have never been at Breonna's apartment that day because she didn't do anything that constituted that type of search. They could have just approached her to question her in the drug trafficking or about Jamarcus instead of having to execute a warrant for essentially no reason. And then Kenneth Walker was trying to protect himself and his girlfriend from what he believed were violent intruders, which in my opinion the officers were violent intruders. He shouldn't have been put in that position where he felt like he had to protect himself and Breonna because they were going to be harmed. He should not have ever been arrested for attempted murder because what he did was completely within his legal rights. So it's absurd that somehow Kenneth was arrested for doing something that is legal in his state, whereas cops did something that's illegal, like endangering multiple people and just blindly firing, and still haven't been arrested for that. And they haven't even fired all 3 officers in Breonna's shooting. If Breonna's only crime was briefly dating someone involved in drug trafficking, then so many other people who are still alive and well and have never been approached by police are guilty of that same crime. Even I have dated questionable men and I've never been associated with their bad behavior, and I've never been questioned in anything that bad that they have ever done. Breonna never did anything wrong and she deserves justice now. By all accounts from her family and friends, Breonna was a bright light in the world. She was caring and selfless in her career in healthcare, and she would have gone on to do so much good if her life had not been taken by those 3 officers. I will include ways you can help Breonna and her family in the description box below, including petitions to sign for her to get justice and ways you can help financially fund Breonna's family and their carriage of justice. That's all I have for today's video. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and thank you.